Okay. Good afternoon, folks. It's time to start. So we're here at the RADEXTRA BOF, looking at radius yet again. My name is Stephen Farrell. There's a list of links on the slide. If somebody remote can confirm the audio is working for them, that'd be good. I assume it is, though. It tends to work these days. So I think we have an agenda. But first, we have a note well. This being Monday. This is some version of the note well that was in some slide deck I had. So the idea is you should read this and you should be familiar with all the things. Be nice to people, behave well, and all will be good. We have an agenda. So we're at the intro part. We do have note takers, thanks to Stefan and Vadim. And Phil is looking to keep an eye on the chat room to see if somebody needs to be relayed from that. You need to log into the data tracker to do the equivalent of the blue sheet. So please do that or have done that. And if you want to get in the mic line, then please join the queue, same as remote folks do. That should be familiar to most people. And obviously, yes, unless you're at the front of the room talking, you should keep wearing your masks. We also have a gentleman at the back there who's filming the meeting, but you're on camera anyway, so I assume nobody has an objection to being on other cameras as well as the many that are around here. So this is our agenda. Basically, we have Alan who's going to present some background as to why start this again. John Frederick is then going to talk a bit about one particular RC, and Bernard, who's remote, will be presenting on another one. Then we'll just talk a bit about how a working group might operate. That's kind of changed, I guess, a little bit since the previous instantiation of RADEXT. People use interim meetings more and so on. And those tools might help in this case. We'll look at the charter text and discuss that. We may or may not get to the point where I doubt we'll end up with finished, polished charter text that's all immediately ready to go today. But hopefully we can tee that up and have all the changes that need to be discussed on the list figured out. We'll then do the usual BOF questions, and our area director, Paul, is here, and will then wrap up and conclude and tell us how good or bold we've been, I guess. Does anybody want to bash the agenda? Is this agenda what we think we want to do today? I'll take silence as a yes. Okay. One other slide I have only is that the intent here is that this is a working group forming BOF. So the goal is to not do another BOF later, but rather to try and form a working group after today, if we're successful. As I said, that probably we won't have. I doubt we'll have like fully final charter text today, but then that can be discussed on the list, and then hopefully, all going well, the working group formation process will continue after that. Okay. I guess that brings us on to Alan. Now, stop slide share. Ooh, select pre-doc. So you wanted the operational ones, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So just tell me when to move.
Okay. I'm Alan, as some of you might know. If we go to the next slide, I'll be talking about operational and implementation experience with Radius. So why are we here? This is a bit of a review of what we have versus what we want. Summary of public information, open source, EduRoam, and then some information from some of the commercial vendors who've also participated. Next slide. So we have things like Radius TLS, not as widely used as it could be. There are issues with the open source implementations. RadSec proxy has one connection per home server, so it's not good for high load situations. Free Radius had some issues with head of line blocking in TCP. Radiator, Cisco, Nokia implement it. NPS does not, and this is also for DTLS, I believe. Supported in some NAS equipment. We'll go to the next one, next topic. DTLS, less widely used. RadSec proxy still has the same issue. Free Radius doesn't implement it. ICE implements it, supported in some NAS equipment. So even though these standards are about 10 years old, they are not ubiquitous. They are not used everywhere by everyone, which perhaps they could be. Next slide. Unfortunately, much of roaming is still radius UDP. TLS PSK is essentially unused. TLS certificates can be hard to get, and telling CAs that you're getting a certificate for web servers and then using them for radius or EAP is still a widespread practice, because that's the only way you get those certificates. Certificates also can be hard to manage. You've installed a radius server, you've put a certificate on it, and it expires. And who did it, last time? How do you renew it? Where do you go? What's the process? And I can say from personal experience, I've bought certificates from public CAs and simply gotten nothing back, right? And this happens. They don't refund my money, but they don't give me a certificate. And then what do you do, right? So next slide. A lot of EduRoam is still UDP because of previously mentioned implementation issues. Open roaming mandates TLS and 7585 dynamic discovery. Many roaming providers use IPsec. Pretty much, if you get radius from a cloud vendor, it's UDP. And it's not as bad as it could be, because all of your passwords and authentication information are in EAP, so it's not that bad. But everything else is in the clear. Where are you? What your machines look like? That's a problem. So next slide. We'll go back one. Did we do that?
I skipped 7.
Oh, okay. There we are. Sorry. Yes. TLS PSK not really implemented. 6614 and 7360 suggest it, but they say nothing about identities, which are also needed for PSK to work. It looks like a lot of the NAS vendors just gave up and went with certificates. Not a lot of implementations of it. I'll get into that in some of the other slides too. If we go to the next one. We have issues with certificates. The CA forum is the CA browser forum. That is their customer base. They don't care about radius or EAP. That's their business. And as I said, a lot of people just go, yeah, this is for a web server, and then do whatever they want with it. Private CAs are hard to manage, and no one really wants to start up a new CA forum just for radius and EAP. There's a lot of work there. Next slide. It's hard enough to get shared secrets correct, and this message is or has been the bane of my existence for 20 years. There's a message produced which says the shared secret is wrong, please double check it. And every couple of months, there's someone on the public mailing list going, what could this possibly mean? And the problem is, if we can't get shared secrets correct, certificates are impossible, right? No one can do it. It's very difficult. So certificates have other issues. Configuring supplicants is hard. One of the things my team looked at a few years ago is war driving, putting up a EduRoam SSID and walking around a university, and something like 60% of devices would just happily hand all their authentication credentials to you, not checking the server certificate, not checking that the CA was known. And unfortunately, we put too much work into spoofing. We actually had an interesting thing where someone would connect to us, to the war system, with a domain name. We would go out to the web server, find out what certificate they were using, and present a new certificate with the same address, the same phone number. Turns out none of that mattered because no one even looked at it, right? Either the systems just bypassed that completely, or everyone just went, yes, yes, yes. This is horrible. We pretend to use TLS for EAP. It's barely functional and not really verified. It's getting better, but it's a problem. Next slide. So how are we going to fix these problems? We can mandate good behavior. We can tell people very, very carefully how to do it. And we can make sure that the implementations have the missing functionality. So this is sort of the background as to why we're here. I think that was it for this one. Next slide. Yeah. So any questions or comments on that? I feel like standing up here and going, hi, my name's Alan and I do Radius. Yeah. No questions or comments. Everyone's in violent agreement. Okay. Next presentation then. Very, very easy. Thank you. Rad extra, it just won't go away. Next slide. So the common question is, if diameter exists and diameter is so much better, why do people still use radius? And the answer, of course, is radius is good enough for most purposes. Another answer is, if you have lots of money, you can buy a commercial diameter solution. There aren't really many open source diameter solutions. There's open diameter, which has been dead for 10 years. Free diameter, which is sort of there. It will send diameter packets. It's not as much of a product to use in production as it could be. Whereas Radius, you go download free Radius servers off the net, and everyone uses that everywhere. So diameter is used in 3G, 4G. Radius is used everywhere else. So if you're paying $200 for an access point, it will not do diameter, full stop. If you're an enterprise, university, you will not pay $400,000 for a diameter server, full stop. No point. All your equipment does Radius. You can download stuff off the net, or NPS has it. Or if you buy Cisco equipment, they'll give you ICE, and it just works and you walk away, right? So in many cases, diameter is simply not a choice. It just doesn't exist for many use cases. Next slide. So what's wrong with Radius? Everything, almost. Security depends on MD5. The fact that it still hasn't been completely broken is a bit of a miracle. Scalability, 8-bit IDs are so very 1993, and the fact that it still sort of works is a bit of a miracle. Features, credit control, diameter, for what it is, has a lot of stuff which is needed on 3G, 4G, some of the bigger ISPs. Diameter's more real-time, credit control, et cetera. It has more features than Radius. Great. So next slide. What do? Well, we add more patches. Nobody wants a new protocol. We tried that with diameter. It worked out fantastic, but it wasn't the next generation Radius protocol. It solved a completely different problem in the end. What we want is minor changes to code, sort of squinting at code, maybe poking 1,000 lines here and there. We don't want a couple of 100,000 lines of code, because that's just a brand new implementation. Works with existing operational models, so no one changes their workflows, their business processes, fixes security issues, and hopefully mostly backwards compatible, or if the implementations haven't changed that much, backwards compatible enough. Next slide. So current proposals that are in the charter move TLS and DTLS to standards track, deprecate UDP and TCP outside of secure environments. Whatever you do in your own network is your problem. Help roaming operators, maybe best practices, ping, trace route, this kind of thing. Where did my packets go and why didn't they get there? Radius without MD5. In hindsight, leaving MD5 in RadSec was probably the wrong decision. It was easy at the time, and it's biting us now. Extending the 8-bit ID space, reverse COA to work around that. Firewall issues. So for examining an edu-roam and open roaming, it is impossible to kick users off. Once they're on, that's it, too bad. Next slide. Yes.
This is probably the place to explain what COA is.
COA, yes, change of authorization and disconnect. Everyone uses COA for change of authorization or disconnect request packets. Disconnect tends to be a bit more widely used, I think, than COA, but everyone calls it COA because it seems easier. Okay. Next slide. Thank you. Implementation status. Yes, for a BOF on not a brand new protocol. TLS and DTLS widely implemented and used. Could be more, but people are using them. Radius without MD5, 2,000 lines of code, right? Hack and slash, get it to work. Status realm, Margaret Cullen has a draft on this. This is essentially ping and trace route. That's 1,000 lines of code. The extended ID, there's no implementation on that. Reverse COA, that's been shipping for a year in Aruba, Cisco, and FreeRadius. Next slide. And I didn't mention the S-Radius stuff in here specifically, but that is there. Next questions. Does all of this make sense? Does this look good? No flames, stones.
So I see people nodding in the room. They're not nodding to sleep. I think they're nodding in agreement.
I think that was it. Nothing else for me then?
Oh,
there's more slides after that. Yes, Carrie, yes.
Yeah, hi, this is Karri Huhtanen from Radiator Software, one of the few radius vendors around and one of the few commercial radius vendors around compared to Alan's open source project. But all of this, we have been discussing this already earlier with Alan, that for the sake of interoperability and for the, everything to work in edu-roam, open roaming, and this kind of operator networks, we need this kind of a working group, and we need these things to be developed for the radios to further in cooperation so that we keep the interoperability alive and everything will still work. And we have been cooperating, for example, with TLS, with Alan already, so that Radiator and FreeRadius work together between each other, and we as a company fully support this new start for the working group and also these drafts that are presented here. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. It's useful to have that kind of input. Thank you. So Bernard, you're in the queue.
I was wondering about the deployment of Radius TLS and Radius DTLS in 802.11 access points. Do you know of any access points that actually support this? I went shopping and I couldn't find one.
I know that I believe the AeroHive ones do. Correct me if I'm wrong, Vadim. The Cisco access points do. DTLS. Yes. Aruba. Carrie says Aruba also. It may be well hidden. Okay. Yeah. The Aruba one. Yeah, the Aruba one does RadSec. So yes, this information is out there, but it's somewhat hidden. So there are some implementations.
Russ? Sure.
So the problems that were listed here have been known for a really long time, like since I was security area director a long time ago. And the answer has always been, oh, no, radius is, dying, diameter's coming. Obviously, that's not the case. Let's just fix it.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, nobody else in the queue. So do you want to go? You want to go ahead with the other slides? Yes.
So I have some more slides on some of the individual documents. Deprecating UDP. The title of the document is Deprecating Radius, but it's really deprecating UDP and TCP. MD5 has been cracked for a decade. And as I was writing this document, I went out and did a little bit of research and a little bit of math. And basically, if you're a hobbyist, you can crack all 8-character shared secrets in a very short period of time. If you have a little bit of money, like hundreds of thousands of dollars, you can crack much longer ones. So basically, if your packets are going across the internet, then anyone with money who has access to those packets is cracking your shared secrets and can do anything they want. And there are some cloud vendors that are not doing EAP. They're doing passwords across the internet because it's easy. You have to assume that all of those passwords have been compromised. It really is that bad. So sensitive information such as device information and personal location is sent in the clear. We know who you are. We know where you are on a 15 by 15 minute basis. This can have security implications for lots of people. So this document mandates the use of TLS outside of secure networks, mandates TLS PSK because of the aforementioned issues with shared secrets even are hard and certificates are even harder, and adds text around TLS missing from 6614. So whether this text goes in here or 6641 bis, it doesn't really matter. These documents are end up all being sort of related. So next slide. Question.
Sorry, Wes Vertiker, USC ISI. So the interesting thing about this, right, is just use TLS, but your earlier slides were all talking about how nobody's using TLS. And so how do you write a document that says you should do something that nobody is doing, even though they could be doing it now? With, in order to get this working, we actually need to get to deployment, and that seems challenging, especially considering the goal of backwards compatibility. And so I'll follow up with one last question, then I'll sit back down and keep taking notes, which is how are you going to prevent downgrade attacks?
Yes. So I'll answer the second one first. Downgrade attacks, it's a different port. It's all administratively configured. So there's no negotiation of TLS or not. For the rest of it, if the implementations get a little better, and I'm somewhat responsible for that, if they get better, it will be easier to use. Some of the reason for deprecating Radius UDP and Radius TCP is public embarrassment, right? It's people still use it because it works, because there's no document saying don't do that. So as soon as you write a document saying don't do that, you now have a little more of a weapon to go after vendors and practices and whatever. It's one more step.
Stefan Winter. I work for Eduroam, and I'm the original author and main editor of 6614, so for Radius TLS. We wrote this for Eduroam purposes just to get everybody using TLS. And I guess the main reason why its uptake is not 100% is because back in the day, I was young and needed the idealism, so I said certificates for the world. And that's where the draft focused on and the RC focused on. But it really is, just like Alan said, people are not prepared to handle certificates consistently. So I think if we do this work here to promote more the use of TLS PSK and other pre-shared key solutions, we will draw, hopefully, everybody who just has a shared secret today to just flip a switch and say, okay, I get a new shared secret out, and all of a sudden it's magic TLS. If it's that easy, I think we have a chance of going forward.
So you have quite a queue at the moment, just to let you know.
Okay.
So my name's Grant Knott. I'm a graduate student at the Naval Postgraduate School and kind of a crypto newbie. So correct me if I'm wrong or please inform me, but do you foresee any issues with mandating TLS PSK with like generating keys for people to use with that, or any difficulty in trying to get people to go along? Because when they see PSK, they might just be like, oh, that sounds like too much work. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, the draft, in fact, has a 3-line Perl script, which will generate a vaguely humanly readable PSK, which is 96 bits. Yeah, the problem is people see PSK and they just go, I don't know, I'll type in something, hello, testing 1, 2, 3, whatever it is, right? They treat it as shared secrets. I don't know, it's something. It's better than using MD5 and shared secrets. Not much you can do.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Karri Huhtanen, hi. Few comments about first. One of the major things that kind of protecting radios with TLS is that nowadays, even if we have EAP authentication that is using TLS to protect the credentials, we are still possibly sending, in some cases, the accounting messages in plain text. And in accounting messages, there might be more kind of interesting information, such as, for example, location attributes of the user, of the terminal there. And if we put this inside the TLS, like RFC 6614, they are protected. But in the other case, these accounting messages are just flowing there without any encryption, with all the user details in them. I know that the EduROM solution is that, yeah, we should just drop the accounting messages on the national level and not send that. But this doesn't work when you are doing commercial roaming and you need those accounting messages, such as open roaming. So it's important to secure the traffic with TLS. Then about TLS PSK, I think this kind of model of using PSK has been around since Wi-Fi roaming was started with Boeing and iPass. It was just used with IPsec, so everybody just configured the PSK for the IPsec tunnels instead of using certificates, because certificates was thought to be hard for them. Yeah. But this to support this development work here. Thank you.
Thanks. Bernard?
I just wanted to comment about TLS PSK, in that I think you need to think about, even though we have controllers today and there's a lot less to administrate than there used to be, you still have installations which might have 50, 100 controllers. And so configuring the PSKs is not necessarily simple, especially, as I think you pointed out on the list, you need a different PSK for every version of TLS. So, you need, the question would be, how would you, say, create a PSK model where you didn't have to change all your access points when you did an update to a new version of TLS? Do you have any thoughts on how that would work?
I've tried. It's hard. I'm not convinced I understand OpenSSL enough to know exactly when you get the correct TLS version and can choose a different PSK depending on that. That requires a bit more research. Yeah, it's a hard problem, and it really needs to be solved, right? It's the deployment and management thing of, if we don't solve the deployment and management problem, everyone will just go back to the same garbage they've been using for 30 years. It'd be nice to have that fixed.
Thanks. Margaret?
Can people hear me?
Yes. Go ahead, Margaret.
Okay. My name is Margaret Cullen. I work at a company called Painless Security, but we consult with Internet 2 to run the infrastructure for EduROAM US in the United States. And someone asked about downgrade attacks, which is a good question. I think the other flip side of that, though, is that one of the biggest things we have to maintain is backwards compatibility for a hybrid infrastructure. We have about 1,000 IDPs and a few thousand service points or RPs in the US. And right now, they've been doing a push for a while to get people to move to EAP TLS. and 15% of our people are on it. So whatever we do, it's going to be years, I think, where the US, and I assume also other countries and parts of the world, parts of Eduroam will be running the old versions, and parts would hopefully over time pick up the new requirements. And I'm wondering, how do we deprecate MD5 in a way that allows proxying between people who use the previous version and this version? Do you have thoughts about that, Alan?
Yes. So the S-Radius draft talks about this. Any of the changes in that document are limited to a hop by hop. So it's a transport profile. For Radius, it doesn't change the contents of the Radius packets as received by the home server. So whatever you want to do with Radius, it just passes straight through. So it is backwards compatible. Stefan had a point on the mailing list about maybe adding a flag to the S-Radius packets saying, by the way, I want secure transport, and don't forward this packet over an insecure transport. So any proxy which does both will work with both. So there's no changes to packet format, packet contents, anything else. So that should be good.
Okay. That sounds good.
Hello, my name is Tom Franke. I'm affiliated with arpad2.net. Speaking about TLS, we have been drafting a specification that enables Kerberos authentication in the TLS protocol. And I'm wondering whether that would be helpful as an alternative way. So not to use PSK, but also not to deal with all the CA and PKI stuff.
That may help. If I remember correctly, in the depths of time, Bob Moskowitz and I had a draft. I think it would have been 2001, proposing to use Kerberos to get to derive the Radius shared secrets. And everyone at the time sort of ran away. But yeah, it's certainly better than just making stuff up. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, that would be good for us, and we at least have some viable use cases. Of course, we have already some from the corporate world, but yeah, it's nice to have others, and maybe we can cooperate in this respect.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, Ian Dickinson from Vitrify. We've got our own implementation rather than any of the others that are out there. But one of the things that we've been paying a lot of attention to is secrets management in general. And I was wondering if you feel there's a need for some BCP around best practices for secrets management when we introduce this sort of stuff.
Yeah, I'd avoid it for Radius shared secrets and simply just say, dear God, run away from that. But for TLS PSK, yeah, I'm happy to guide people in any way so that they don't invent stuff on their own.
And do you foresee that there's anything unique in this space, or we can piggyback on work done elsewhere?
I'm happy to piggyback on work done elsewhere. Don't want to invent new crypto in RADEXT. Okay.
So that's drained the queue currently, and we're about at the time we wanted for this presentation. But if you want to take another few minutes to cover any of the other slides, just is there anything you want to jump to, or?
No. I think
maybe we can come back with later discussion.
Yeah, the rest of the slides are all about all the other drafts. Do we want to go through those, or just skip them and move on to other things?
You're more familiar with the content. Could we, is it worth just spending like 5 minutes?
Sure.
Very quick?
Sure.
Okay, so
we'll flick through the slides very quickly.
Oh, that was quick. That's too quickly, probably.
Yeah. So S-Radius is the secure transport layer. TLS, throw away all the MD5, packet obfuscation, packet encryption. CHAP and MS-CHAP are unaffected. We'll go to the next slide. Reuse the authenticator field for a 64-bit request reply token, so you get an extended ID for free. As Stefan suggested, that maybe adding a flag for that. The next slide. That's okay. The extended ID, that started quite a while ago and was just, hey, if we have this 16-byte essentially random field, why not use it as a unique authenticator? There's complexity there. It's more complex to implement than something like sRadius. So whether or not this is a good idea or not, we'd have to have a longer discussion on. Lots of negotiation and signaling. Reverse COA, that is 30 seconds. The NAS connects via TLS to your Radius server. How do you kick the user off? Well, you just send COA packets back down that TLS connection. There's some text around that in the draft, but really that's the basic idea. And that gets you past NAT, firewalls, et cetera. And it leverages off of the previous COA proxying document. So you should be able to proxy it all the way back. And at least some of this is implemented in various systems, as I said. So next slide. Yes, all there, all documented. There's details to be worked out, but it does work. So next slide, we'll flip through them. I think that's the last one. Yeah. Okay. Nothing else. I'll sit down.
Thanks, Alan. Okay. Oh, pardon me. Thank you.
You can just immediately go to the next slide.
Sure.
That's...
Yes, hello. My name is Heikki Vatiainen. Just one comment. The drafts that were sort of quickly presented there, they touch different parts of Radius messages and use status server for different kinds of things. For me, they look, when I went them through one by one, reasonable, and I'm interested in implementing them. But then I thought we probably have to coordinate and consider that if somebody implements all of them, is there something that makes them not these drafts fight and one of the other drafts, or are there something that can be implemented all together so that when we implement this reverse COA, extended IDs, and what sRadius, so does it still work?
This is Alan again. The answer is yes. There's always caveats. The one thing for me is the more I look at the extended ID draft, the more I think it's very complicated, but everything else really should work together. The main thing for sRadius is it's just a point-to-point transport. It doesn't change anything else. So whatever other drafts come through, like status realm, those just get transported. So there's some overlap, but they're either compatible or completely orthogonal. So that makes it a lot easier.
So I guess what that discussion might suggest is that maybe it might be a useful milestone for a working group early on to say, let's think about exactly which documents we want to construct and factor them out this way or that way. Okay, great. Thanks. Frederick?
Yeah, okay. Janfred, I'm with the national roaming operator for EduRoam in Germany, Deutsches Forschungsnetz, the German Research and Education Network. And I want to talk about the Radius over TLS standard. It's currently an experimental. You can go to the next slide. It had its 10-year anniversary this May. Basically, what Alan just said, use TLS to encrypt the Radius packets. We have this constant shared secret, RADSEC, which is used then to calculate the authentication codes there. And we have, as Alan already said, the authentication, mutual authentication via certificates, and optional TLS PSK, but the RFC does not really specify exactly how to use it. So it just says you can use TLS PSK, it's optional, but no further guidance on how to use it. And also, as Alan already said, we have a wide deployment of radius over TLS already in EduRoam, for example, for the connection between the national roaming operators. And in Germany, it is mandatory for all institutions, if they want to connect to our federation proxy, they have to use radius over TLS. So our radius server only, or our RADSEC proxy only has 2 or 3 special cases where we use radius over UDP still. Next slide. So what we want to do is actually just bump the protocol from experimental to proposed standard, or somewhere else in the standards track. So, and then we want to add some specifications from our deployment experience with the current experimental version. So basically, we will have to update the TLS versions because I think it still says TLS 1.1 is mandatory. So obviously that's not valid anymore. The question would be here, should we make TLS 1.3 mandatory? I just had a brief exchange with Stefan saying maybe it is okay for this draft to still make TLS 1.2 mandatory and 1.3 optional, because then we have this as a complete backward compatible standard, and then with S radius we can start fresh. We definitely will have to add more text about TLS at PSK to clarify how to deal with identities and this sort of stuff, so that we actually have enough to go for RADSEC without PKI, which is one of the main reasons I think why people still use radius over UDP over RADSEC. We had the idea of using raw public keys as well. So if you have to exchange secrets and you don't want to use certificates signed from any CA, and where do you get these from, then why not exchange just raw public keys and then use them? Yeah, we had a short discussion about adding server name indication as well to the draft. We already have trusted CA indication in the RFC 6614, but my goal for the hackathon was to maybe see if I can use that in RADSEC proxy, and that dream was crushed by the lack of support in OpenSSL as far as my research went. Yeah, so basically, if you have any other update of the RFC 6614 that you think would be useful, insert it there. I have just started with a draft, published it, but of course other authors and reviewers, editors are also welcome. We have already, I have already received some feedback from the original RFC 6614 authors who are willing to contribute here as well.
So, yeah, people in the queue.
Hi, Tom Franke from ARPA2. I think your option to go with raw public keys is interesting. I've took a look myself as well, and I also noticed that there is hardly any implementation around that actually supports it. There's a very nice RFC 7250 that specifies certificate type negotiation, and we needed it for our TLS KDH story. So I've implemented this functionality in GNU TLS. So if you need a library that supports it, you can take that one. And I'm currently working on Embed TLS to support it there as well. So if you have any other requests, just let me know, then we maybe can work something out, because it's nice, of course, if it's widely supported, because it opens up lots of possibilities.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Hello, this is Heikki Vationen again. First, I welcome the update, and there's one thing that I was thinking that actually some time ago when I was working on our RADEXTRA server, I thought it doesn't support TLS session resumption, and I thought, well, maybe it should support it. But then I thought, well, is it really necessary? Because I think our sessions with radius over TLS are long-lived, so they probably wouldn't be coming and going as often as, for example, with TLS-based EAP authentications. So what should we say about session resumption? Because I don't think the draft or the original RSA didn't say anything about it. So if there's session resumption, then there's the validation of should it be allowed to resume and so on. So would one option simply be that it's not used?
I will have to think about that. It's definitely an interesting use case, especially if you don't allow things like this reverse COA, then may be helpful to allow session resumption in use cases where you have only occasionally an authentication request, so that you don't have to keep the connection alive. I'm not exactly sure. I don't think the original draft has anything about that. Yeah.
No, I don't think the original draft has anything about it. I just looked and I looked for resume and resumption and went through it. But so it's sort of unspecified, but with TLS it's there and could be surprising in some cases.
Yeah, we could definitely add a section about session resumption in this draft.
Yeah.
Thanks for this in.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi, this is Karri Huhtanen from Radiator Software again. A few comments about this. One is what you just discussed with Heikki, who is also from our company, was that there is already in the implementations, at least in Radiator, there is a possibility to make dynamic tunnels and then drop them if there is no traffic for them, or then make these kind of static tunnels that are kept with heartbeat. So that's already kind of already in the implementations. But on the behalf of Radiator software, we kind of fully support updating this RFC 6614 because there was an original developer of the Radiator was part of the writing the RFC 6614. So we are definitely interested in participating in updating this thing. Then some other things about this draft was that there was some language that we may need to discuss about that. For example, that there was language that could be interpreted in the draft that one would need to verify the RADEXTRA client's IP address and the DNS name when it provides its certificate, and that kind of doesn't make sense in the sense that if that client is, for example, behind multiple nuts and just makes the tunnel there. So we need to be kind of careful so that the draft isn't kind of written in a way that would kind of tell other implementers that this is the way to do it.
Yeah, I have some of my own comments also in the GitHub repo for this draft. So you're free to add comments there via issues. Yeah,
thank you.
Very welcome.
I will definitely kind of contact you about those things. Then some operational comments as well. We are running eduroam top-level radius servers in Finland for CSE FUNET as well, in addition to kind of developing Radiator. And in there, the situation is that there is a very rare organization that are connecting with RADEXTRA. And we are only now in the progress of connecting Finland's top-level servers into European servers via RADEXTRA there. So it's something that might benefit from this kind of update, that it's easier to take into use also in other organizations. And my final comment about this is then there are Alan's draft, for example, that reverse change of authorization. And what I think Heikki was already mentioning about those other drafts, there needs to be coordination so that we don't do kind of overlapping work with different drafts. And for that, this kind of revival of this working group would be kind of a good idea. But those were my comments.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's the cue. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Bernard, I'll share the deck and then try and give you control. I guess it's the best thing to do, probably.
Okay.
So there's the deck. Now, how do I give control again? Okay.
Ah, there we go. Okay, so this is a little talk about the history of this process, which is described in RFC 6421. So as Russ mentioned, the limitations of radius security have been long understood. When RFC 2058 was published in January 1997, I believe that the IETF security area director, who was Jeff Schiller, described security as barely adequate. And at that time, radius was only about dial-up networking, but it expanded subsequently to VPN and to 802.11. And at that point, some additional concerns emerged. In particular, as radius was considered for use in 802.11, the radius EAP RFC 3579 described known attacks and potential solutions. And if you read section 4.3, it's 8 pages long, just the security issues, the dictionary and known plane attacks. But also, one thing which came to the fore was the leaking of geographic location for 802.11. So in dial-up networking, knowing that you dialed into the point of presence really only told you roughly what city you were in. But with 802.11, knowing what particular access point you were connected to gave a much more specific geographic location. And in particular, as we are moving to cloud-based radius services, if you can imagine somebody snooping near a cloud-based radius service, they would be getting enormous amounts of location information. You know, they would have the user ID and they would have the MAC address of the access point that was being connected to, and with a little bit of use of location APIs, they would basically have enormous numbers of people's location information on a minute-by-minute basis. So even in 2003, it was understood that there was this threat. And so RFC 3579 section 4.2 specified radius over IPsec for security services. And this was actually, the lack of confidentiality in radius was actually considered a deployment blocker by many enterprise customers. And this was implemented in sort of the higher end enterprise access points fairly widely. And the way it was done was that the certificates were provided by an enterprise CA, which handled the enrollment problems and so forth. But obviously, you needed to have a significant IT staff to maintain the certs. Another issue which was found was that in these kind of secure installations, it was very important for the radius server not to run if IPsec wasn't functioning. So the question was, how would the application know that IPsec was up or not? And this was somewhat of a challenge. So a little bit about the roadmap. As Russ mentioned, this has been around a while. The action got started while Russ was still a security area director in 2006. The area directorate requested RADEX working group to review security deficiencies and add a work item. In 2008, David Nelson submitted the first draft of what became RFC 6421, which was published in November 2011, which was crypto agility requirements for radius. That summarized the status of radius security, described the requirements for securing it, and laid out a two-stage process for standardization of secure radius. Stage one was publication of the experimental RFCs, which have already happened, as people described. But stage two was promotion of proposals to the standards track, and I'll talk a little about what the requirements were for that and why they were not met. So in 6421, basically the requirements for standards track publication were that the drafts would have to be evaluated against the requirements. In most cases, that was already done in the experimental RFCs, and they do meet the requirements through TLS. But there was also a requirement for summary of deployment experience and evidence of multiple interoperable implementations and deployability. And that was the holdup because they'd never really met that requirement, and I don't believe they do today either. And section 2 was the definition of crypto agility, which is basically the ability to adapt to evolving cryptography and security requirements. And the idea was that you could do this within the transport layer, which is what the proposals ended up doing, or potentially within the Radius protocol, which is not done in the proposals that have been described. And the idea was to not change everything about Radius, to make as few changes as possible, but just to add the security, and therefore not require new attribute formats or wholesale changes, which was thought to limit deployability. Okay. So 6421 required per packet integrity and authentication. It made confidentiality recommended, as well as support for both X509 and pre-shared keys, as was described. The end-to-end security of Radius attributes was optional and is not part of the two proposals that have been described. Section 4.3 describes backward compat, and that was to allow the transition to occur over a period of time, because typically the most difficult thing is to get this into the devices. And so you'll have legacy devices for long periods of time that only support Radius as it exists. And as you buy secure devices and introduce them, you can move more and more of the traffic over to the secure Radius. But for a period of time, you'll have the secure and insecure versions running at the same time, which also means you need to keep track of which access points or NASs are secure and must run secure Radius, and which are legacy and therefore can only run the legacy Radius. Typically, what was done to handle a backward compatibility was to use a separate port, which is allocated for the experimental RFCs 2083, both TCP and UDP. Okay. So as was mentioned, there were two documents published as experimental, the Radius over TLS 6614, and then Radius over DTLS, which I'll talk about in a minute. Okay, I mentioned the ports. So let's talk a little bit about Radius over DTLS. That was the last experimental draft published in September 2014. Section 1 does talk about some of the issues I just described with Radius over IPsec. One of the advantages of Radius over DTLS and TLS is that the application can be intimately aware of the security and make sure that it's put in place and stays in place, so that you'll always have those security services available. Okay. All right. So what happened during the process that caused it not to complete? So it's now been 16 plus years since the IETF security area first initiated work on Radius crypto agility. Certainly, we've understood the security issues. Alan talked about them. The location issues were understood in 2003, and they've only been magnified by location APIs, which make it a cinch to go from an 802.11 MAC address to a location within 100 meters. But the experimental proposals have been in the field for 8 to 10 years. There's some implementation and deployment experience, but very limited market penetration. And so the big question is why? We've talked about some of these reasons, but what do we need to do to get over this? One of the big things I believe is that this never got into a testing and certification process. For example, for 802.11, there's the WFA testing and certification process people have to go through to get a logo for their access point or device. They have to demonstrate that they support various heap methods, can do radius, etc. Radius over DTLS and TLS never made it to that process. And part of the reason for that is they were not considered deployable on large scale. So getting that certification process together and tying it to the logo is extremely important, because once it gets into a mainstream certification, basically if a device maker doesn't do one of these things, they're not going to get the logo, and that could be a problem for them. So that's a big question. I hope there's some people here who participate in the WFA process who can talk a little bit about what might be required to get to that point. Okay, so where do we go from here? Well, I think it is time to try to move ahead on phase 2. We're going to have to recognize what it's going to take to get widely deployed, and in particular, get the device vendors on board. We haven't heard from them so far today, but they're pretty critical, because if you don't get them on board, then you're never going to get over the deployment blockers. And I think we've talked a little bit about support for TLS PSK, which is going to be very important. But also there's questions about what's in the open source library, whether there's actually industry support for this. We haven't really heard much from the device makers. And so the big question is, do we have what it takes to really get over all the problems we've had so far? And I mentioned that radius deprecation is the final, not the initial step, right? You have to have something deployable before you deprecate the old thing.
Thanks, Bernard. Stefan's in the queue.
Yeah, Stefan Winter, Ederome. So Ederome is also participating in the Wi-Fi Alliance, and you brought up a very, very good point there. So I've already pushed some work into the WFA specs before. I think I know how to do it. And once we have final RFCs out of this process here, I'm very happy to take this forward to WFA.
Yeah, this is Alan again. Yeah, I think in the end, these solutions are not technical, right? They are political and administrative. And the way to solve a lot of these deployment issues is mandating or public embarrassment. Nothing else seems to have worked so far.
Okay. Nobody else in the queue. Thanks, Bernard.
Yeah, I would just say, and I would ask if there's anybody from WFA here, but you know, basically, if you can't convince people that this is deployable, you don't get to the stage of getting certification. And at that point, the embarrassment comes from the lack of certification. But if you can't even convince the certification bodies to adopt it, that it's testable and interoperable, then you never get to that. And at that point, just deprecating radius will just cause chaos, and probably will cause multiple profiles to form, and you'll end up with a lack of interop.
Yeah, I think I could add that some things are easier to get into WFA specs than others. And in this context here, the transport for radius is something that is in the IEEE 802.1x spec. And getting the WFA to enforce a specific deployment profile for something that is in a different spec is maybe a bit harder. So it's a bit on the fringe between where WFA still can have a say and where it says, yeah, but IEEE says use a random authentication server protocol, and it could be radius or it could be as radius or something else.
Okay, so those are the technical presentations. We'll go back to share slides in 1 second. Okay, so we got that. Okay, so I think there were I think some earlier efforts to try and move some of these topics along that kind of somewhat foundered. And I think it might be worth noting, I'm not sure how many people in the room or remote are that familiar with the IETF. So for many of you, this will be obvious, but perhaps not for all. It could be that if a working group is formed here, that the common mode of operation that people use these days might help compared to previous efforts here. In particular, you can use things like MeetEcho, the tool we're using today, for interim meetings. Working groups tend to have a lot more interim meetings these days. They're using GitHub repos with the drafts in them and accepting PRs and using issue tracking and so on. That's all kind of more commonly used than was the case, I think, when previous efforts in this space were being made. So I think would likely help a working group to progress. And I think the people who are proponents here seem happy enough that that would likely be a kind of a modus operandi for a working group. Okay, so the next part of the agenda is we have about half an hour. We're not short of time, so if people want to talk more, that's fine. Or if everybody's happy, we can move ahead. But we have some draft charter text, which is kind of not ready. But what I'm going to do is, it's on 3 slides. I'm going to flick through them quickly and then go back and go through them a bit more slowly and invite people to discuss the points of them. And our note takers are kind of teed up to try and keep copious notes on this part of the agenda. And I think hopefully if the outcome of the BOF is positive, we'll have to go back and work on the charter text details on the list and then with the area director. So with that, this is the first slide that you've had a chance to look at. The second one talks about some work items. I'm just giving you a moment to decide in your mind that you might want to come to the mic to talk about a specific point in a minute. And the third one has a couple more work items and one gigantic bullet point. So, okay, so these are this is the draft charter text as we have it. So I think what we'd like to do now is get people to say, I'd like to see this bit changed. Here's the kind of change I'd like to see, so that we can then kind of progress that on the mailing list afterwards, as a working group is forming, if we're successful. So now is the time when it'd be good for people to jump in the mic line and say, this particular bit of text is great, dumb, needs changing. Here's the kind of change I would like. Carrie, thank you. It's always better when somebody starts.
Yeah, hi, it's Kari again. Yeah, for these suggestions, I think they are all good already on the slides, but I might take there also let's say, there was some discussion already about this kind of operation recommendations. So what should be recommended and those things. So that might be an addition to these ones. And also was the coordination mentioned here, so that the thing I was commenting earlier about avoiding the overlapping work, this kind of coordination between those trusts, or is it kind of already thought to be the point of working group already?
So I don't think there's any charter text that says it would be a good idea for the working group to look at the set of drafts and then figure out how to refactor them. There's no text on that, but adding some text on that sounds like it might be a good idea, right? Yeah.
Yeah, because that would kind of justify the working group, because the working group could then kind of coordinate, for example, the work bit for that change of authorization in the reverse direction and so on, so that it could be then just be referred or added to the updated RRC 6614, for example.
Right. So yeah, so I think that like having a milestone for the working group to sort of figure out which drafts it wants and then try and adopt the offerings that people have made.
Yeah.
As a specific work item, to have a milestone like that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, Heikki was also commenting about something, especially about this radius server status updates and how to use them. So this is something kind of larger because it affects multiple drafts there. So this kind of coordination talking about this together is the kind of important thing there.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe?
This is Joe Salloway. So here, the draft charter here mentioned something about compatibility between radius and diameter. Is that, and it wasn't clear to me that that was there was some mention of diameter, but mostly in kind of an orthogonal context. Is that something that we still want in, yeah, the first page. Second paragraph, furthermore, to ensure backwards compatibility with existing radius and compatibility between radius and diameter.
Sorry,
yeah.
We didn't catch that.
Alan said this was probably from the previous charter.
Okay.
I think I would suggest dropping that because that didn't sound like that's a really a desired, you know, it could be fine, but I don't think that's something we really would want to take on with this work. And the other thing was, I think Bernard brought up the point that, you know, it's fine to deprecate it, but if we can't really deprecate it before we have something else that's feasible to deploy without causing a lot of trouble. So just the ordering of that, it just came first. Probably want to just reorder that.
Great, thanks. So we have other people in the queue, but just on the point about diameter, it's, I didn't see anybody disagreeing with that. But so if you do want to disagree with dropping that diameter point, that it would be good to kind of get into my mind to say that. Chris, I think you're, Kari, I think you were in the queue. Chris.
Yeah, so I want to understand be compatible with RFC 3539 because I took a quick look at that and it seems pretty old guidance. And if one of the complaints here is that there's not really transport agility in radius protocols, that seems like a shackle to have on. And so I'm kind of confused why that's a goal.
Fair question. Alan, I guess, do you want to speak to that? Because I'm assuming this text was yours originally.
Yes, this text was originally mine, some from the previous charter. RFC 3539 is old, but it's the current sort of line in the sand for what AAA protocol should do. If we decide we don't care about it, it would be good to explain why, right? Rather than just going, well, people did all kinds of research years ago, and we're simply going to pretend that never happened. So we can, whether or not this is in the charter, I don't know, but it would be good to have a discussion saying yes or no to that.
So Chris is behind you still. And you didn't look entirely convinced from here.
Yeah, well, so I guess, can we change that to say if we need to update it, then we update it? I mean, because again, a quick look at that guidance, I wouldn't want to say conform to it.
Sure, that sounds reasonable.
Okay, so just for the benefit of the minute takers, do you want to make a semi-concrete suggestion as to what to put in the charter? I didn't quite get it exactly.
Yeah, I'll try and write some text to say that, you know, if you know, not complying or not being compatible with 3539, then maybe 3539 should be updated.
Okay, I mean, I guess another way to do it would, you know, to say, if you're going to be incompatible, just explain why somehow.
That I can live with that.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Bernard.
So I'm the author of 3539, and really what that was developed to do was to investigate radius over alternative transports like SCTP. So, you know, the stuff in there would be relevant if you wanted to define radius over quick, but if you were going to do that, why would you need the other work in the charter, right? You wouldn't do radius over DTLS, you do radius over quick. So I don't understand why this reference to 3539 is there. If we're really trying to focus on just getting this stuff to deployability, talking about alternative transports probably is not a great thing to shove in there as well, or updating 3539, that would probably also be a distraction. So I would just remove this.
Okay. Thanks, Bernard. I see a thumbs up from the back of the room. Don't see anybody objecting, so it sounds like the strike that bullet seems like the consensus right now of the room. Okay. Stefan?
Yeah, also the text says we have to be backward compatible if possible. At the same time, we are starting work which is intentionally backwards incompatible with S-radius. So a bit more nuanced wording might be good here. It's just triviality, but.
Okay, thank you. Jan-Fredrik?
Yeah, Jan-Fred speaking. Just for the sake of having it in the minutes, we talked a little bit about radius TCP. So basically, what we're saying with Alan's draft was don't use radius if it's unencrypted. So the question would be if we actually have to move 6613 to standards track, or if we can just deprecate it with the deprecating radius over UDP. But then we have a down reference clash with the new 6614. So maybe that's something that we should keep in mind.
I'm not sure I got that to the point where I'd be able to write the minutes. Stefan, did you catch chapter enough? Okay, good. He knows more about radius than me, obviously.
Sorry, this is Alan. Sorry, yeah, just to that point. The fewer documents, the better. If we can have a down ref, I don't think 6613 needs to be changed.
There's a mechanism for doing a down ref, and if that makes sense, it can certainly be done. Yeah. Bernard?
I just wanted to talk about mandating the use of TLS-13. I think that's a little bit premature. It was discussed that supporting TLS-12 and 13, mandating 12 and making 13 recommended might make more sense. And it also is good to have two versions, so you're forced to get over the PSK issue and not force an upgrade of the PSKs. So I wouldn't mandate 13. I think it's premature.
Okay, so any other reactions to the what to do about TLS-13 or TLS versions? I think what Bernard, what you were suggesting there is mandate 12 and recommend how to use 13, but don't necessarily mandate it.
Yeah, and having 2 is good because then you make sure that you can handle a version upgrade.
Okay, so I see a thumbs up for that. So the suggestion is that to have the charter say that TLS-12 or better is mandatory, and also define how to use TLS-13 if you're using it. Margaret?
Okay, there I am. I just have the comment that TLS-12 is known to expose the certificate unencrypted. And if we're going to mandate the use of TLS-12 and suggest 13, the only thing I would say is that we need to make sure that we understand exactly what's in the certificate and whether we are violating any sort of privacy. Given that it would be in the transport, I assume we're talking about, not in the methods. Presumably we won't have user information in there, but I'd like to at least think about what we'd be exposing, because we, to make sure we actually are improving the security rather than making it worse.
Yeah, good point. So I'm not sure if that would need to be in the charter or not. Do you think that kind of text needs to be there? Or?
No, but I don't think we want to switch what it's. Let's take out the specificity about 12 and 13 from the charter rather than saying mandate 12, because I don't think we should say mandate 12 unless we're sure that's a good idea, and I can't be sure that's a good idea thinking about it for 30 seconds.
Okay. But I think we do want to say TLS-12 or better. We don't want to.
What about saying mandate the use of TLS? And you could say something like, if you have to, you could say version to be determined, but I think we could just say mandate the use of TLS and no one thinks we're going to go mandate 1.1. I don't know.
Sure. Paul, our area director is popping to the microphone.
Sorry, Paul speaking briefly. I think this is maybe you just have to look in reference to the UTA TLS specification, which is like a TLS for applications, and they actually have considerations that talk about all these items. So maybe look at that document for advice.
So that's BCP. I can't remember what number. Does anybody know? Rowan?
It's RFC 7525 BIS though.
Yeah. So, but the BCP number won't change, right? So.
Oh, right. But I know, for instance, in EAP-TLS, when we use it in the method, one of the trade-offs we have, one of the issues that we have, is that TLS 1.2 will expose a username and realm in the certificate, so it actually has less privacy than, say, EAP-PEEP, if EAP-PEEP is used with privacy turned on, anonymization turned on. And so we're sort of having weird trade-offs as we switch from one method to another. And I just want to make sure we wouldn't run into those problems with, I don't think the user ID or realm would be included in the certificate, but I'm not even really sure. So I don't know whether TLS 1.2 would be a good choice or not without knowing what's going to be included in the certificate.
Fair point.
I was just going to comment, we're talking about BCP 195.
Okay.
So before we charter here, I mean, we can check
yeah.
whether there's anything residual you want to say beyond that. But that gives us the wiggle room for TLS 1.2 versus 1.3.
Okay. So and I think Margaret's, just to put a thought in people's heads, I think what Margaret's saying is that we should be careful about what data is being exposed in Clear based on whatever we're doing. So maybe there's a generic sentence we could put in that covers that then would say that, if TLS 1.2 presenting the server cert in Clear is a problem, you shouldn't, then, that would steer the working group away from doing that.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to say that. I think we have to take into account that the way this is used in some places very widely, people can tell whether someone is traveling. People can tell where that person is physically located. This isn't about some sort of tracking of web use or something, which I also think is bad, but we're talking about very important needs for privacy here. So I just want to make sure we know what's in that certificate. That's all.
Yeah, so that, and I think more generally, we could maybe try and craft a sentence for the charter that says that the working group should, pay a lot of attention to possible metadata leakage of things like user identifiers or locations and so on. I'm sure we can come up with some words around that.
Sounds good.
Great, thanks, Rick.
Hi, my name is Rick van Rijn. I'm with the ARPA2 project. The thought that I'm getting here is we all want to go towards TLS 1.3 if we can, but there's a backlog. Would it be an idea to say TLS 1.2 expires in 2 or 3 years from now, and then it has to be upgraded to TLS 1.3? It's just an idea.
Sure. I wonder about the practicality of that, and even if it was practical, this wouldn't be the right group of people to do that. I think because TLS is kind of more broadly used than just for this purpose. Heikki?
Yes, hello, this is Heikki Vatiainen. So my understanding is that TLS 1.2 is good enough when you want to set up a secure communication channel. But TLS 1.3 is much better when you want to hide things like client and server certificates. So would this kind of help in the sense that what is more important? Because there's the plus point of TLS 1.2 is that it's more widely implemented. So it's probably easier to get it up. And if it's good enough from the privacy perspective, then it can be used, but 1.3 would be preferred if it's working.
Yeah. So I'm sensing kind of broad agreement about that. They'll have to figure out some words that kind of represent it well in the charter. But I think the intent of everybody seems fairly clear on this.
Thanks.
I wouldn't object to just removing the sentence, mandate the use of TLS 1.3. Because that does, if we take that out, it doesn't forbid us from later mandating the use of TLS 1.3 if we decide that's the right thing to do. I would not like us to say mandate the use of TLS 1.2.
Gotcha. Yeah. Alan?
Yeah, just to respond to that, I think it's TLS 1.3 has been around for a while. It takes long enough to deploy things. I'd be very, very in favor of just going, you know what, it'll take long enough to write the standard. It should mandate 1.3 because it will still be 3 or 4 years before everyone supports it. If the longer we wait, it'll be a decade before people start really deploying TLS 1.3.
Good point. And I get there's a bunch of thumbs up at the back of the room there again for that point. Yeah, so I think the takeaway is that, you know, there's some subtle charter text needed to resolve this issue, but the real decisions would happen after the working group is formed. Then, you know. Okay, so we don't have anybody else in the queue for that set of bullet points. You know, we're not that short of time, so it's possible to go back if somebody wants to, but let's go forward in the meantime.
So this is Alan. The first bullet point is implemented, seems to be okay. The second bullet point is just thrown out. We may not need it. We may need it. We may not. And the third one is a very, very long way of saying a small amount of information. And some of that text is in fact wrong. The last sentence is really no. This is after. I ended up writing the S radius draft and implementation after the charter text. And after going through the draft and implementation, it's just a transport. The contents of radius packets are unchanged. So that last sentence is wrong. So just last sentence or two is just delete it.
Right. So we had a quick chat about this earlier, and I think for me, the meat of that last bullet, which is very long, was, you know, it should be possible to take the output of this working group and implement it in a way that's FIPS compliant.
Yes. Yes.
So I think that was what I thought.
Yeah, radius without MD5. Once you use TLS, there's no point in using MD5 to encrypt your passwords because they're already protected by TLS. So just send them not in the clear, but send them inside the application layer of the TLS tunnel, and then everything's fine. And you can send CHAP, you can send MS CHAP, you can send vendor attributes, you can do whatever you want. So this S radius here is just a transport profile. Okay. It doesn't change the content or meaning of anything other than message authenticator.
Okay, so that sounds then like that this big last bullet should turn into two short bullets. One says it should be possible to have a FIPS compliant implementation. That's a goal. Another one says, do you want to just give me some words for that? The second short bullet would say have a secure transport, or?
What Margaret says in the list is fine. Define a variant of radius that's FIPS compliant.
Okay. Right. So Margaret has some text in the chat room that she suggested to replace that entire last bullet.
Yeah, you don't need to say don't shoot yourself in the foot.
What? Some people have enough feet that they want to do it all the time.
But I'm still a little concerned that the throwing out MD4 and MD5 on one side and the remaining backwards compatible for deployment isn't going to conflict. And I think we're talking about, and I'm not a radius expert, we think we're talking about both transport and there's also content inside that might maybe be using these algorithms, right? So I'm not entirely sure. I just don't want us to exclude anything, or at least have the consideration that we're not just talking about transport, we're also talking about the content.
So yes, ignore the last two sentences. They're wrong. Once I implemented it and wrote the draft, it's transport. If you want to do CHAP, which is MD5, or MS CHAP, which is MD4, it's perfectly fine. It's just if you choose to do the S radius transport and MS CHAP, then you're still not FIPS compliant. But so what? That's your choice. You're the one who takes the MS chat data and authenticates it. For everyone else in the network, they just see packets, right? They see this MS chat data. They don't care what it is. They don't have to do any MD4 on it. So what this transport does is gets rid of the MD5 signing for the packets and gets rid of the MD5 encryption for the user password. Essentially, everything else is the same. So does that answer your question? Maybe not.
Probably. I just want to make sure that there is no remaining dependency on MD5, even if there's an outer transport layer protecting the inside.
I'd say that's a site choice, a deployment site. If you want to use CHAP or MS CHAP, you can. I don't think we should deprecate those in. Yes. Yes. Yeah. So yeah, we shouldn't deprecate CHAP or MS CHAP in this document. This is just transport. So,
yeah. Okay. Joe, you joined the queue briefly. Was that just a button push?
My question was answered.
Okay, good. Thanks. Bernard?
I just wanted to comment on this, which is the way the servers work in FIPS mode is they essentially turn off the cryptographic operations. So when you're operating in FIPS mode, you don't have access to MD4 and MD5. And so you don't need to deprecate the attributes. That has nothing to do with it. It's just that you need to define how the server behaves in the absence of these cryptographic operations. That's basically what it is. Think about it as trapping errors. You'll attempt to make a call to MD4, MD5, and it just will return an error because that cryptographic operation isn't there.
Right. Yeah, yeah. So I think the text Margaret put in the chat room seemed like it captured well. But basically, she suggests that we say define a variant that is FIPS compliant is the thing we should charter.
Yeah, but it's not deprecating the attributes. That has nothing to do with it. It's yeah.
Yeah, people are nodding when you say that. Yeah. Wes?
Yeah. So I've been listening to the discussion and I've been reading the text, and it does occur to me that a lot of this discussion and a lot of this text is a little overprescribed for most charters. You don't need to decide today whether in the BOF whether TLS 1.2 and 1.3 is going to be used, or various cryptographic. You need to say that you're going to solve that problem and have the discussion later. So you're to some extent holding the working group in the BOF.
Yep. Yeah. On the other hand, that can be a good sign that people kind of know what they want to do. They just have the details. But, on that second bullet on this slide, Alan kind of sorry, Wes, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, the charter text is too long. It would be another way of saying what I'm saying, right? You can reduce it down to just the problem.
Fully agree. Alan, I think you kind of postulated that second bullet as a maybe not kind of thing. I'm just wondering, did other people think doing this is a good idea or not worth bothering with? Or again, should we leave it here, eliminate it? Any opinions?
I'd be in favor of eliminating it. The only thing I could think of we might need to do with time or date types is the status realm draft may need something greater than second resolution, but that's a problem for that draft and not for the charter.
Sure. Okay, Alexander.
Hi, Alex Kluter from CoreMem. I'm kind of interested in the 64 date type, but with milliseconds or microsecond resolution personally. Particularly if the draft about traceroute for radius goes through, that'd be really helpful.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is support for doing some work in that area, but that we don't think that again needs to be mentioned at a charter level, because it'll happen when people get to those documents. So I think the current suggestion is we strike that particular bullet. Phil?
Yeah, on the second bullet on the date thing, it strikes me that you might be boxing yourself into a particular approach, in that if you're probably not going to get rid of that 32-bit type, and I do not believe that you're going to need to specify a date with specificity within a century for purposes of radius. So a 32-bit value is probably going to be sufficient so long as you have implementations that wrap appropriately.
Okay, so I think we're suggesting to ditch that particular bullet because work in that space, adding milliseconds or whatever will happen just in the course of events as the working group proceeds. Okay, so that is the charter text. What I'm going to do is just go back through it one more time, see if anybody's forgotten something they want to object to or something that's missing that should be there. So I'm going to give you one last shot at this for the next couple of minutes. Might be quite boring just watching the same text again, but just in case.
Again from Cisco, on slide number 2, there is like UDP, maybe better to say, not even UDP TCP, better to say unsecured transport, like unsecured common form.
It's deprecating UDP should probably be deprecating either insecure transport or deprecating UDP and TCP.
Okay.
Paul speaking. Maybe not say UDP, because if someone at some point wants to add quick support that uses UDP, it gets really confusing.
Right. Okay. So, Vadim, since you're one of our note takers, I assume you can make a good note about that particular point. Thank you. And Margaret in the chat likes the phrase deprecating insecure transport. And here's our third slide on charter text again. As we discussed it already, that will change quite a bit. But okay, so I'm not seeing anybody in the queue. I just want to do another kind of last check that that as discussed, that this kind of charter is complete enough from people. Jan-Fred?
Yeah, Jan-Fred speaking. Can you go back one slide for the TLS? I'm not exactly sure if adding TLS server name indication also needs to be in the charter. Maybe it's okay to remove it and we can decide whether we want to implement it or not somewhere down the road.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I'm also doing, I do some work on encrypted client hello as well. So if you are going to do something based on SNI, you need to be careful about the fact that it could be encrypted in the future. Margaret?
I just wanted to say for the status realm stuff, which I wrote, so obviously have opinions about, we have a fairly complete draft. It may need changes to match what the working group would want. And we have an implementation. So I wonder if we would like to include it in the charter from the beginning or not.
Sure. And I haven't read the draft. It is linked to the agenda materials if people want to have a look at it. But what would what would be a kind of a short bullet you would put in the charter to reflect that?
Improve operations for multi-hop proxy networks. Ping add ping-like and traceroute-like functionality and loop detection and prevention. None of which we have now. It's like operating a 1980s host file-based network with no ping, no traceroute, and no loop prevention.
Right. Okay. So I think Stefan looks like he's making notes that are good there. So yeah, I think the point is to include something like ping traceroute, and there is a draft that people can look at now, and that could be the working group could look at adopting that draft early on. I don't see anybody objecting to, or no head shaking, kind of thumbs down kind of stuff about adding such a thing. Rowan?
I just wanted to ask a clarifying question. Are we exactly sure those are the primitives we want and only those primitives, or in the charter, again, do we want to generalize a little bit? Because it begs questions like, when you say ping-like, what do you mean to be ping-like? And we want more than that.
Yeah, I mean,
we could say there's currently a thing called status server, and it lets you check the status of a server. It's effectively like a ping. So we could say a multi-hop status server functionality and loop detection and prevention, if we wanted to say it in more radius-like terms.
That that got a bunch of thumbs up, so that sounds like text that people would like. So thanks. Yeah.
Could Margaret maybe repeat that, because that's not very.
Okay, Margaret, could you put that in the chat room and just so Stefan can grab it in the minutes correctly. Okay, and again, on the point of kind of completeness, nobody's identifying other things that are missing from a charter that they'd like to see. All right.
Someone has just added this.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
We have someone else.
Yep.
Mark Donnelly, also of Painless Security. On the last point, the multi-hop network operations, I'd prefer to have that be more open-ended rather than listing off specific items, or if we're going to list off specific items, put it at least those specific items, because I imagine that as we go forward, I think we're going to find more things that we want to consider for working, like realm discovery or what have you.
Okay, so Margaret has suggested some text in the chat, which I think goes along the lines you're saying, okay. Perhaps unexpectedly, but if you could have a look at that and see does it kind of meet your requirements for that comment. I think it does. But she was just typing it as you walked to the mic. So.
One of the things I don't want to do, and even though it might sound like I do, is I don't want to do a while we have the hood open, right? I don't think we should just implement every good idea if there's not a reason to believe that it's been implemented. In the case like the loop detection, most people who operate multi-hub networks have implemented some sort of vendor-specific option for that. In the case of the status server like multi-hop stuff, we have status server already. We have an implementation of it already. I think we need to be really careful not to just write a charter that asks people to submit as many good ideas as they can think of. So I think we want to try to be, I don't know, somewhere between listing the things we think are a good idea and having some openness for operational stuff, and just soliciting more ideas. And I'm not sure how best to word that, but.
Sure, yeah, I think it's a fair point that there can be a tendency to people keep producing drafts and offering them, and that could get distracting. So yeah, I think we'd like to have some. So I guess we'd like to have a little phrase somewhere in the charter that says, these are the work items. These specific things are what we want the working group to be chartered for. Extensions beyond that would need rechartering or something. It's a generic kind of thing, I guess. And then, in real life, people ignore the shit out of that kind of stuff later on anyway. So it's worth a try. But Stefan, you're new.
Yeah, when it comes to these good ideas that come floating in, some of these tools like ping and trace route might actually yield an error reason, but Radius never got an actual error response code. There is one you can use at limited point. So do we want to consider also introducing an error response packet so that you can report back on errors?
Okay. New topic?
Error response. Well, there's a response thing defined in the status realm packet.
There's also protocol error. I forget which RFC. There is that defined, but yeah.
Bill?
So we seem to have come back to it because a while back somebody said, well, it takes 10 years, whatever, for changes to get through into the infrastructure. So one of the things that I think is important to bear in mind is make sure that you solve the problems now when you're making changes that you're going to want to have changed in 10 years' time. Because, I've been coming to these meetings for a long time now, and many times people have said it'll be 10 years before you can do that will be deployed, and then 15 years later, we've got the same problem because nobody deployed the solution. So if you're going to change stuff, make sure you do all the changes you need so that people can move to an environment where we're not using passwords at all, we're getting rid of all the hokey security, and we're doing the stuff properly.
Sure. Okay, so I think I have a sense of where the charter tech should go. We can confirm that on the list, but we're at the point in the BOP where we have the usual questions. And one of the parts of BOPs is that people always want to quibble about the question and ask a different question. We'll see if that happens, but the questions I'm going to ask are listed on the slide. If you would like to disagree with those questions, then now's the time. Or this might be one of the rare occurrences where that disagreement doesn't happen. We'll see.
You got a unicorn on your hands.
Cool. Okay. All right. So these are the questions you want to ask, and this provides input to the area directors and other people in the ISG and IOB as to whether a working group should go ahead and be formed based on this BOP. So the first one then is is the problem statement clear, well scoped, solvable, and useful to solve? So we have a polling tool in the where is it? Show of hands tool. Okay. I'm just going to type question 1, and if you think that the problem statement is well solved, if you want to give a positive answer, raise your hand. If you'd like to give a negative answer, then click the do not raise hand. Okay, that's looking pretty one-sided so far. We'll just give it another second or two. Okay, so for the minutes then, if you can record that we seem to have landed at 29-0 in the positive sense for that one. Great. So we're on to question 2. This would be a shocker if it's if the IETF is not the place to maintain an IETF protocol. So if you think the IETF is the right place for maintaining an IETF protocol, then raise your hand. If you think it's the wrong place, then go on. Who's it? Does anybody want to admit being the one do not raise hand person? Okay, so that seems to be settling down pretty well. So again, for the minutes, that's 35 humans and 1 bot, so of some sort. And 1 bot. And okay, so question 3. So here we're looking for people who are willing to review drafts. So there's an existing set of drafts. You can see them linked from the materials. And I guess what I'm looking for is who's willing to review those drafts. So in the room, you can kind of put your hand up. If you're remote and you're willing to review drafts, can you just give some kind of positive signal online in the chat room? So keep your hands up just so I give a rough count. That's like, I'm seeing about a dozen people in the room, hands raised, being willing to review drafts. And they're, as you might expect, they're mostly some of the people who came to the mic and made useful contributions. So that looks good. And we have about 4 more folks who are remote have indicated. So that's my 16 or so people willing to review drafts. That seems like a sane kind of number for me for this kind of group. And question 4 then, who's willing to edit drafts? Now, this is typically a smaller number, but we have 1, 2, 3. I see 5 hands in the room. 1 was half up, and a couple online as well. Which I think if we had 5 or 7 people willing to write drafts, I suspect they might suck in some other contributors to be co-authors at some point. And again, that seems like a reasonable number to me. So that's about 7 people went out, according for the minutes. Okay, and then the payoff. So assuming we fix the charter text, which will happen on the mailing list in the next short while, we'll pop out the draft minutes will be out pretty soon, and we'll take a stab at crafting some draft text, charter text that matches today's outcome. So assuming that work gets done and doesn't get screwed up, who thinks that the IETF should form a working group with this charter, with that charter as it will be? So I'm going to ask the question in the polling tool. Question 5 is, should this go ahead and be a successful BOF and result in a working group as discussed? Raise your hand if you think it should be. Click the do not raise hands button if you think we should not go ahead and form a working group. So that's about the same number as we got for previous polls of, and for the record, that's 35 raised hands and 0 not raised hands. 36. Wow. Cool. Okay.
Stefan, can I ask you to do one more poll?
Of course.
Who here, or like, if you're a vendor, are you likely going to implement the result of this working group?
So are you interested in vendors? Or
I'm interested in
implementers?
implementations. Implementers, sorry, yes.
So the question is, if you're an implementer, would you?
Will you likely implement this work?
So I'll change it to will you to do you expect to? Is that probably a fairer question? So we have a poll. If you're an implementer, do you expect to implement the output of the working group as we discussed it? And if we get 36 for this, that will be interesting. There we go. So we have one not raised hand. Would that person like to join the, open their microphone or come to the microphone here and say why? You don't have to, but if you could, that might be useful. Okay, so
if the do not raise hand, I will not implement it, or I'm not a vendor, so I can't say.
Yeah, so it could be somebody who clicked because they're not an implementer, but you can always unclick. But as it is, we have 9 people have said that they would expect to implement, and 1 who said not. But we don't have further information. That's what we have. Okay, so how do I get back to seeing the slides? There we are. So that's the questions with results. And I guess at this point, we hand over to our esteemed area director to see. Sorry, Margaret, are you? No.
I was going to ask if you wanted to ask. I think there are ourselves, but other operators in the room. Whether you wanted to ask whether operators would deploy it, but I think that you might have already gotten the impression that we will, because we probably voted on one of the other polls.
So I'm looking at the area director. Do you want to ask that poll, or are you okay with that? Ask it. Okay. We go back to the polling tool. And so the question here is, if you're an operator, would you expect to use the output or deploy the output? If I could type, it would be good. So there you go. There's a poll. If you were an operator, would you expect to deploy the output as discussed? And that's, yeah. So we have 12 raised hands, 1 not raised hand. Again, if the person who's doing the not raised hand, giving the negative feedback, would like to give us more detail, that would be great. But you don't have to. Okay, so then we have 12 raised hands and 1 not for that poll. Okay, so that, again, I think that brings us to the point where our esteemed AD will
So first of all, thank you very much for everybody who was here, who decided to come here, shared our opinions. This was very useful. This was more or less one of my first BOFs where I was in charge, and there's no controversies, it seems, so it's very nice to see. I just wanted to state, so I will talk to Roman. We'll officially let you all know soon what we'll do. Meanwhile, if you have things you want to say to us that you're not comfortable walking to the microphone for, please feel free to catch me in the hallways or send me a ping over email or whatever. So feel free to reach out and talk to me if you have any concerns, any additional comments. And I guess we'll get back to you soon. I'm not sure if Roman have anything to add.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. It seems like we have fairly strong consensus to move forward here. So this is exciting.
Good. So I think on the basis of that, it would probably make sense for the proponents to go into a huddle and do some editing of charter text to kind of help you out with the next steps. Yeah. Okay. So that's an action on the fairly obvious people at the moment. And again, so having made that edit, please, we have to make sure that gets sent to the mailing list for review.
And so maybe one last point. Provided we would actually form a working group, we will need chairs that are not reviewers and that are not document editors. So if you have a feeling that you could be good or useful in that position, or if you think you want to be a shepherd for these documents, please also reach out to us so we get better people, hopefully, to or it would be nice if we can get people that have a little more Radius experience than just grabbing random people from the street. But
absolutely,
but they do need to be they do need to not conflict with people actually doing the work.
Sure. Yeah. And just so it's clear, I volunteered for today. I did not volunteer for the future. So there will be a real kind of requirement to look for chairs. It won't be me. Okay. So with that, thanks. I think that's a successful outcome. Well done. And we'll follow up on the mailing list with the ADs, etc. And now, good time to go get a beverage. So, thank you. And thanks to the minute takers as well.
And also, actually, thank you very much, Stephen, for doing this on a fairly short-term notice when I reached out for a panic.
You're up. No problem. Just take a minute to copy them. I'll just copy the notes as they are in case they disappear somehow. Yeah, move to that side.